Scipio Africanus is renowned for his crucial victory against Hannibal at the notorious Battle of Zama, where he not only rescued Rome from one of the greatest menaces it had ever faced, but became one of its all-time generals. However, notwithstanding his achievements, Scipio was subjected to a terrible injustice by the Romans themselves. And what was it? If you're curious, stick with me because we are going to look at the story of this great commander of ancient Rome in this video. Born in Rome in 236 BC, Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus came along during a highly turbulent period for the Roman Republic. He was born into one of Rome's oldest and most respected families, the gens Cornelia, who were already well known for their military and political background. His father, Publius Cornelius Scipio, was also a leading general, and Scipio's mother, Pomponia, was from a noble family in the city. Scipio's life was not easy, despite his pedigree. He was raised in an environment where Rome was preparing to meet one of the greatest challenges in its history, the Second Punic War against Carthage, a powerful force on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. The situation in Rome was growing increasingly complex. The Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca had dealt major defeats upon them, starting with the famous Battle of Trebia in 218 BC, and later the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, where Roman forces were trampled underfoot. By this time, Rome was on the brink of ruin, with Hannibal's threat growing across the whole of Italy. Scipio was just a young man at the time, but the story of his rise starts against this desperate scenario. In 218 BC, while he was only 18, his father was killed in combat in Spain, causing a significant impact on his life. Rather than it being a paralyzing tragedy, the loss of his father heightened his resolve. With his father's death, the burden of carrying on the fight against Carthage fell on the shoulders of the young Scipio, who, aged 25, was ready to take his first big step in Roman history. In 211 BC, he was made a quaestor, an administrative and financial position, and was given the chance to act directly in the war against the Carthaginians. In 210 BC, aged just 26, Scipio was made commander of the Roman campaign in the Iberian Peninsula, now Spain, a crucial part of the war, as this is where Carthage derived many of its resources and troops. Taking control of this area was essential to weaken Carthaginian power and deal a fatal blow to their forces. But the situation was far from easy. Rome was still suffering from the crushing defeat at the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC, and Hannibal, the Carthaginian commander, was pursuing his victorious campaign in Italy. Many in Rome, therefore, doubted Scipio's ability to overcome such a strong enemy. But he was bent on reversing the direction of the war and soon proved his worth. Scipio launched his campaign in the Iberian Peninsula with a string of significant victories. One of his most brilliant deeds was the conquest of New Carthage, today Cartagena, in Spain, in 209 BC. It was one of Carthage's main power hubs in the region, with a strategic port and vast resource deposits. Scipio besieged New Carthage and, using a series of accurate tactics and coordinated attacks, captured it, defeating the Carthaginian commander Mago Barca, Hannibal's brother. This was a landmark victory, as it deprived Carthage of a crucial foothold, greatly weakening its presence in the region. This triumph at New Carthage not only diminished Carthage's military capabilities, but also boosted Rome's morale, proving that a new leadership could turn the war in their favor. With his victory at New Carthage, Scipio became a figurehead in Rome. He was acknowledged as a skilled and visionary leader, someone who could really confront Carthage. His accomplishments on the Iberian Peninsula also seemed to help reverse the impression that Rome was on the wane following the defeats it had suffered in Italy. In the wake of the loss at New Carthage, Hannibal Barca had to abandon his attempts to reconquer Hispania and return to Africa to pursue his main task, protecting Carthage from Roman invasion. By this time, however, his troops were already depleted, and morale had slumped. With Hannibal having returned to Africa, the arena for the war shifted to the Maghreb region, where Scipio Africanus began to make his own breakthroughs. In 204 BC, Scipio, supported by allied forces, disembarked in Africa and began making rapid forays into Carthaginian territory. His strategy was astute. He raided the Carthaginian colonies and their African allies, undermining Carthage's position and forcing its government to reach complex decisions. In invading North Africa, Scipio wanted to force Carthage to deal with the Roman army in its own land, with none of the advantages of being far from home that Hannibal had when he invaded Italy. Given this threat, the Carthaginians rallied their forces for a final face-off. After years of fighting in Italy, and with his forces already exhausted, Hannibal was recalled protecting Carthage. He understood that this would be his last chance to salvage his city, and upon returning to Africa, Hannibal started to reorganize his troops, preparing for a decisive battle against Scipio. In 202 BC, the forces of Scipio Africanus drew closer to Zama, a city near Carthage, where the final clash would take place. The battlefield stood ready, and the two great forces were about to meet. Scipio's and Hannibal's forces deployed on the eve of the battle. Both commanders had ingenious tactics, but they were also conscious that this would be the last stage of the war. Scipio Africanus, mindful of Hannibal's cavalry skills and the enemy's experience with siege tactics, chose to adapt his strategies. He understood the Carthaginian cavalry, one of Hannibal's most powerful forces, posed a major threat. Scipio used a novel concept. He assembled his troops in a more flexible battle line, with horsemen and soldiers in specialized divisions that could move more quickly. He also took advantage of an alliance with the Numidians, a North African people with outstanding cavalry. It was a strategic breakthrough, as the Numidian cavalry neutralized one of Hannibal's great units, resulting in the Carthaginians losing an important edge. The Roman cavalry and Scipio's Numidians succeeded in disrupting the battlefield, forcing Hannibal to fight without one of his greatest forces. Once the battle began, it proved fierce, but Scipio's talent for organizing his troops and working to exploit his enemy's weaknesses started to pay off. Hannibal, who had lost his superiority in the cavalry, gradually saw his lines crumble. Scipio's victory was ultimately decisive. Hannibal lost, and Carthage was helpless to resist another Roman attack. The war had finally been won for Rome. Hannibal's defeat and the victory of Scipio Africanus not only assured Rome's supremacy in the Mediterranean, but also meant the end of the Carthaginian threat. Carthage was compelled to sign a peace agreement, paying heavy compensation and giving up its colonies and armies. Plutarch, in his biography of Scipio, stresses the impact of this victory. It was one of Rome's greatest victories, not only because of the strength of its arms, but because of the dazzling strategy and courage of a single man, Scipio. Plutarch, Parallel Lives, Scipio Africanus. Following Zama, Rome cemented its position as the dominant Mediterranean power. For his leadership and military acumen, Scipio Africanus was given a place among history's greatest generals. He was honored with the title Africanus as recognition for his victory in Africa, and was lauded as a national hero. However, Hannibal's defeat was embittering. Despite being one of history's greatest strategists, he failed to avert Carthage's demise, which, after Zama, would never be the same again. Scipio went on to become one of Rome's most respected figures, and his popularity was tremendous. This earned him a major position on the Roman political scene, and he was a key figure in the following decades. Nevertheless, this popularity also led to tensions. Scipio Africanus was a highly charismatic and ambitious figure, and, although he was widely admired, some Romans began to see him as a threat. Although he was the great hero of the victory over Carthage, his influence on Roman politics became a topic of debate. Scipio Africanus was elected consul in 199 BC, the most eminent position in the Roman Republic. In this capacity, he had the power to lead armies and exercise authority over the state affairs. Yet, even at the pinnacle of his career, Scipio seemed not to fit into Rome's political structures. Over the following years, especially from 193 BC, he began to distance himself further from Roman politics. He was openly opposed to some of the Senate's policies, especially in relation to the handling of Carthage after the war. The peace imposed on Carthage following the Second Punic War was severe, but some senators wanted even more punitive sanctions for the Phoenician city. Scipio, who was familiar with the difficulties faced by Carthage and its population, preferred a more balanced approach. His opposition to the hard line of the Roman senators, who wished to bring about the destruction of Carthage, resulted in friction. Scipio felt that Carthage no longer posed a threat, and that Rome ought to focus on other issues, such as its territorial expansion and strengthening its Mediterranean presence. These political disagreements led to an uncomfortable situation for Scipio in Rome. Some years into his consulship, in 187 BC, Scipio Africanus made the decision to withdraw from political life. He distanced himself from the Senate and public disputes, pursuing a quieter life on his estate in the countryside. The decision to withdraw from politics was partially a reflection of his anger at the corruption and manipulation of power in Rome, as well as the strain of constant political intrigue. This stepping down was also a means for Scipio to preserve his honor. He knew that, while he was immensely popular, times were changing, and the Romans were growing increasingly accustomed to the faction system and internal disputes. In 187 BC, however, a particularly galling incident took place. Scipio Africanus was charged with corruption during his time as consul, and with having personally benefited from the campaigns in Hispania. The prosecution was probably motivated by political rivalries, as many of the Roman senators of the time, who had their own agendas, looked for ways to overthrow Scipio. The allegations against Scipio were mostly unfounded and failed to prove that he had behaved dishonestly. The stain of the charges was already there, however, and his reputation was temporarily tarnished. Nevertheless, Scipio remained undeterred, and although he was forced to publicly defend his integrity, he still managed to maintain respect among the population. Scipio would spend his last years in resentment and disillusionment at the ingratitude of Rome, which, despite his great military victories, accused him of being corrupt. He died in 183 BC at 60 years of age. He was interred with military and civilian honors, but did not receive the glorious farewell expected of a general. Yet his contribution to the history of Rome is undeniable. Zama's victory marked him out as one of the greatest generals of all time, and his title of Africanus would remain a symbol of his greatness. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.